School is hard enough, with all the video games and opposite sex to distract us from our homework. What makes it even harder is having to unlearn all the stuff they taught us in elementary school that turned out to be utter BS. To this day, you can even hear some adults repeating these amazing historical tales that years ago somebody just pulled out of mid-air. Greetings, traveler. I am R.A. Grimes. I write novels. Those are the books without the pictures. That's right, the big ones. The rest of you probably already know me for my extensive canon of novels, including Moby Dick 2, in which I took the old, boring classic and revamped it for a new generation, along with laser sight cannons and Black Hawk helicopters. So, who is R.A. Grimes? Well, in some countries, I am worshipped as a god. In other countries, I am a wanton fugitive, a malefactor, a desperado, as it were. But in this country, the United States of America, I am known as an author, an adventurer, a playboy with a love for fine women and fine cheese. And tonight, I am your professor, and I am going to have to take you back to school. Be prepared. There's going to be a test afterwards.
This generation rules the nation with version.
In 1492, a Spanish ponce by the name of Christopher Columbus won his long-standing feud with the monarchy and the Catholic Church to get funding for a voyage to East Asia. They were afraid that he would fail spectacularly because everybody knew that the Earth was a flat disk, and the direction Columbus was sailing would cause him to fall off the edge and into the mouth of the giant turtle that supported it. Columbus, as we are told, did fail to reach his destination, but not because the world was flat. It was because he crashed into the future greatest nation in the world, baby! The United States of America. Well, the West Indies, to be more exact. Yet another whopper, we're told. Thus, Columbus proved the world was round, discovered America, and a national holiday was born. Alright, so now for some truth. In the 1400s, the flat earth theory was taken about as seriously as the time cube theory is today, if not less so. The shape of the world has been pretty much settled since the orb theory was first proposed by the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras, around 2,000 years before the existence of Spain. In fact, the navigational techniques of Columbus's time were actually based on the fact that the Earth was a sphere. Trying to navigate the globe as it was a flat plane would have screwed up the trip even more than it was. The Spanish government's reluctance to pay for Columbus's expeditions didn't have anything to do with their misconceptions about the shape of the world. Ironically, it was because Columbus himself severely underestimated the size of the Earth, and everybody knew it. The distance he planned to travel wouldn't have taken him anywhere near Asia. Nevertheless, he eventually scraped together enough funds to embark on this ridiculous adventure, and the screw-up that was Columbus's voyage has been celebrated annually in the Americas and in Spain ever since. So, where did the myth come from? It began with author and historical charlatan Washington Irving, who wrote a novel about Columbus in 1838. The novel was fiction, but some elements managed to creep into our history books anyway, probably by some editor who wanted to spice it up a bit. Who's going to read a history book anyways? It's just filled with a bunch of boring junk, right? Motivational speakers love to tell this tale, inspiring underachievers with the story of this German kid who was just like you. Despite his sincerest efforts, he could never manage to do well in his math exams and struggled desperately with physics while working as a lowly patent clerk. That muddled kid grew up to be Albert freaking Einstein, and if he can do it, so can you. The truth? Well, no, you can't. As it turns out, Einstein was a mathematical prodigy, and before he was 12, he was already better at arithmetic and calculus than you are now. Einstein was in fact so smart that he believed school was just holding him back, and his parents purchased advanced textbooks for him to study from. Not only did he pass math with flying colors, it is entirely possible that he was actually teaching the class by the end of the semester. So where did this crazy idea that Einstein did badly in school come from? Well, it is thought to have originated with a 1935 Ripley's Believe It or Not trivia column. There's actually a good reason why it's a bad idea to include Robert Ripley among the references in your advanced university thesis. The famous bizarre trivia expert never cited his sources, and the various facts he presented throughout his career were just a hodgepodge of things that he thought he read somewhere, heard from somebody, or just plain made up. When he was first shown this supposed expose of his early life, Einstein allegedly just laughed and probably went on to solve another 12 mysteries of quantum physics before dinner. By the time he finally kicked the bucket in 1955, it's entirely possible that failure was the one concept that Albert Einstein had never managed to master. Of course, this just reaffirms what we have always suspected deep down. Success really is decided at birth, and your life will never be better than it is right now. Sorry about that. You've probably heard of Sir Isaac Newton. He's pretty much the Jesus of physics. In the late 17th century, Newton practically freaking invented science. The discoveries we can thank him for include the laws of motion, the visible spectrum, the speed of sound, the law of cooling, and calculus. Yes, calculus. One wonders if anybody in history ever had a thought before Newton. Probably his most famous discovery, however, is the law of gravity. The story goes that Newton, a modest mathematician and professor of physics, was sitting under the shade of an apple tree one sunny day when an apple dropped from a branch and bopped him in the head. Well, most people would merely think, ouch, son of a, and draw a closed fist upward for about 10 minutes. Newton's first instinct was to formulate the entire set of universal laws governing the motion of gravitating bodies. A theory so sound that it went unchallenged and unmodified for over 200 years. Great story. The truth, Newton never mentioned a thing about the apple, and in fact it was another guy named John Conduit who first told the story some 60 years after it supposedly happened. Even then, it was decisively vague about whether Newton actually saw an apple or whether the apple is a metaphor that he used to illustrate the idea of gravity for people less intelligent than he was, i.e. everybody. We'd like to think complex discoveries happen this way, with a sudden light bulb pop on over our head. Kind of makes it seem like it would happen to us one day. The next great idea will occur to us while we're wasting the afternoon on a park bench. In reality, Newton spent the best part of his life formulating and perfecting his theories. So when I had kids, I wanted them to know the truth. Just Newton, hunched over his pile of papers, covered with clouds of tiny numbers. Just months and years of tedious, grinding, silent, lonely work, until he had a nervous breakdown and finally died years later, insane from mercury poison. Welcome to the real world, Timmy. Another great American hero to whom many seem to attribute mutant superpowers to is Ben Franklin, the scientist and statesman whose inventions include bifocal spectacles, the urinary catheter, and freedom. He was particularly interested in electricity and faced with intense skepticism from his colleagues about his theory that lightning is electricity. Legend has it that he conducted an experiment to prove them wrong. So Franklin, with a knowing wink, went out into a raging thunderstorm and released a kite with a lightning rod affixed to the top and a metal key attached to the string. When the kite had annoyed the face of God to the point that he threw a bolt of lightning at it, the charge passed down the string and into the key. And when Franklin touched the key, it let off a spark of static, which somehow allowed him to discover electricity. That's the story we all heard in elementary school. Now, let's find out the truth. The truth? It's certainly true that Franklin at least proposed a kite experiment. Less certain, however, is whether or not he actually got around to performing it, and some sources suggest he did not. What is certain is that the experiment had nothing to do with lightning. If someone flew a kite into a storm and it was struck by lightning, there's a good chance that person would be utterly destroyed. In fact, everyone in the vicinity would at least suffer some hair loss scalp syndrome. Many people today who believe the amended story of Franklin's kite experiment grew up immersed in the revisionist history of Walt Disney, whose classic cartoon Ben and Me portrayed Franklin not only as having flown the kite in a thunderstorm, but also having been a complete freaking jerk. Well, few people still believe that all of Franklin's innovations are actually attributed to his pet mouse. The kite story is still widely accepted despite the unfortunate testimonies of anyone who's ever been stupid enough to replicate it. The reality of Franklin's experiment is that it simply involved flying a kite into some clouds to collect a few harmless ions in order to prove that the atmosphere carries a charge. It is through Franklin's discoveries that science was able to infer later on that lightning probably has to do with electricity. The idea that his kite was actually directly struck by a bolt of lightning is a rather dramatic exaggeration, perpetuated by some school textbooks, which also hopefully serves to convince generations of children that getting hit by lightning is not only totally harmless, but scientific fun. It also, like the Newton apple thing, takes one of history's great geniuses and portrays them experiencing childlike wonder at some common idea, as if everyone who lived before the 20th century was a childlike simpleton.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
If you ever want to know why your parents are the way they are, it's because they were likely raised on a series of deeply disturbing educational films. Back before kids were raised by TV, these productions got shown in classrooms across the country, each one heavy on fear, but light on the facts. As a public service, we've edited together some highlights from some of the most hilariously bad lessons ever put on film. Make sure to take careful notes to forget everything you are about to see. Duck and Cover, probably the most famous of the Red Scare educational films. Duck and Cover taught young school children the basics of nuclear bomb survival, particularly duck and cover. That's about it. Of course, that won't do much for you besides assuring that your charred corpse will be found curled into the fetal position, cowering under your desk. The film goes on to suggest that covering yourself with a thin blanket can ward off the dangers of falling debris, shock waves, and deadly levels of radiation. Even wrapping your full head with dry, flammable newspaper can help. Hey, why not?
He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. First, you'll have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You will know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you were not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer. You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck and your face. Duck and cover underneath a table or desk or anything else close by. This is what to do if you should be in a corridor. You duck and cover tight against the wall this way. Remember to keep your face, the back of your neck, covered tightly. Try to fall away from windows or doors with glass in them. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you. It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Paul and Patty know what to do. Paul covered the back of his head so that he wouldn't be burned, and Patty covered herself with the coat she was carrying. They knew how to duck and cover. Tony knows the bomb can explode any time of the year, day or night. He is ready for it. Duck and cover. Attaboy, Tony. That flash means act fast. Tony knows that it helps to get to any kind of cover. This wall was close by, so that's where he ducked and covered. Duck and cover. This family knows what to do, just as your own family should. They know that even a thin cloth helps protect them. Even a newspaper can save you from a bad burn. But the most important thing of all is to duck and cover yourself, especially where your clothes do not cover you. But there might not be any grown-ups around when the bomb explodes. Then, you're on your own.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
The film was made by Archer Studios and was commissioned by the Federal Civil Defense Administration. It came under fire at the time for both instilling a culture of fear and giving incredibly stupid advice. Boys Beware, a chronicle of various ways gay men of 1961 stalked their young prey, courtesy of Sid Davis. The narrator warns that the homosexual can be anywhere, and he just isn't happy unless he's sodomizing naive teenagers. This film helps those young, tender, blonde boys recognize the dangers of mentally ill homosexuals and points out some of the warning signs. Is the man being a little too friendly, offering gifts, playing basketball with you? Then he is almost definitely planning to dump your corpse on a pile of dead teenage rape victims in his backyard.
That looks innocent enough, doesn't it? Lots of young people hitchhike. Seems like a good way to get from one place to another. But sometimes there are dangers involved that never meet the eye. So no matter where you meet a stranger, be careful if they are too friendly. One never knows when the homosexual is about. Let's take the case of Jimmy Barnes. Jimmy played baseball all afternoon, and he didn't feel like walking home, so he decided to thumb a ride. He'd done it 100 times before, and he didn't think anything was unusual when the driver struck up a friendly conversation. In fact, he seemed like a real nice guy. What Jimmy didn't know was that Ralph was sick, a sickness that was not visible like smallpox, but no less dangerous and contagious, a sickness of the mind. You see, Ralph was a homosexual, a person who demands an intimate relationship with members of their own sex. So no matter where you meet a stranger, be careful if they are too friendly, if they try to win your confidence too quickly, and if they become overly personal. One never knows when the homosexual is about. He may appear normal.
The film was commissioned by the Inglewood Police Department, which says a lot about Southern California cops of the early 1960s, and shown to pubescent boys in classrooms across the country. Strangely, in addition to all of the scenes of homosexuals snatching innocent young boys off the corner, our narrator implies that simply being the victim of the homosexual can get you in legal trouble yourself.
Finally, Jimmy told his parents, and they reported it to the juvenile authorities. Ralph was arrested, and Jimmy was released on probation in the custody of his parents.
Habit Patterns, a delightful film that teaches young ladies nothing brings out the best in a person faster than snarky criticism and sneering observations about their appearance. It tells the story of Barbara, who is helped along by a fairy godmother-like narrator who admonishes her for sleeping in, eating quickly, drumming her fingers on the desk, and most unforgivable of all, being an awkward teenager at social functions. In the most nagging tone imaginable, our narrator compares habitually late and disgusting Barbara to her OCD-riddled neighbor Helen.
This was how your day started. Started wrong.
Barbara! Barbara, get up, you'll be late for school.
Does she have to do this every morning, Barbara? Even if you're not really well-mannered, you could make a habit of being civil. Helen has trained herself to know what she's going to do, and she's able to match the right skirt with the right sweater. As usual, all your neighbors knew how late it was when you went by at your regular dog trot. Helen has a habit plan, and it includes a healthy breakfast and a pleasant word with her parents. And you're almost always late, and you're guilty about it. You're in a rut with a bad habit, distaste for your sloppy ways. You were embarrassed by your messy hair and the fingernails you had neglected to clean. You weren't listening.
But we always go to the beach. Every year we take a cottage at Esmond.
You couldn't help interrupting, could you? You added nothing to that conversation.
Telling teenage girls to exaggerate their perfectly average flaws doesn't work in real life, but in a bizarre choice for an educational film, it doesn't even work in the story, which ends with Barbara dissolving into hysterics while the narrator sneers, "It's a little late for tears, isn't it, Barbara?"
It's a little late for tears, isn't it, Barbara? Even though you didn't know it was going to happen today, you've still had your whole life to prepare for it. And now it's a little late, isn't it?
In Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, little children are told a fantastic story of patriotism and late-night horse riding. In the poem, Revere and a few others coordinate a secret warning signal, so an informant can tell everyone how the Brits are invading. One lantern in the Old North Church if the Brits were coming over land, 2 lanterns if they were invading by way of the harbor. After chilling for a while with his horse, Revere sees his signal of 2 lanterns and starts galloping from village to village, warning all the locals to tool up.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the Old North Church as a signal light, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea, and I on the..."
The truth Well, you might notice that the story of Paul Revere that you've always heard happens to rhyme. If you ever took a creative writing class or actually listened to the lyrics of a Kanye West song, you might have noticed that the truth really doesn't care how well it rhymes. But it's still somewhat surprising to learn that Paul Revere got sole credit for the ride because Revere rhymed with here. I wish I was joking, but Longfellow was not out to write an accurate history. In fact, he gets many other facts seriously wrong in his poem. What he wanted was a poem that reminded those who read it of the glorious beginnings of the United States. And why was that so important? Because he wrote it in January 1861, and the country was about to be torn in half. He wanted to inspire New Englanders in the face of the looming Civil War. The story starts to fall apart when you start looking at the facts. First of all, this was a covert operation, screaming, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" at the top of your lungs when 20% of the population are loyal to the crown is a good way to get busted. He did quietly warn other men, but whispering your warning is a lot slower than shouting it from horseback. To get the drop on the British, they needed an estimated 40 people to take part in Revere's ride. The only two other names we know are William Dowes and Samuel Prescott. The latter only took part because they ran into him returning from a lady friend's house at the awkward hour of 1 a.m. Another thing that slows you down when warning of a potential invasion is stopping and having a beer. Yep, the three men took a break from starting America by stopping at a pub where some British sentries decided to investigate these patriotic ne'er-do-wells. Dowes and Prescott led the sentries on 2 exciting chases through the woods, both managing to evade capture and reach the towns they were supposed to warn. So what about Paul Revere? Well, he gave up without a fight at the pub. Yes, of the 40 people involved in the operation, we know about 3, and Revere was the least heroic of the group. But because his name is easier to rhyme, we celebrate his achievements instead of the guys who actually completed their rides. Well, that's it. I see the fat lady getting off the stage. She's looking right at me. Now I've got to go put her to bed. But I just want you to know that I am not going to be satisfied until I sucked every last lie from those textbooks, like the final gurgling slurps of a milkshake. Thus, I will return to unravel these stories that have enthralled human imagination for decades, if not centuries, that have actually turned out to be BS. See you next time.